we can share this meeting. Okay. There we go. So our topics today are going to look at the purpose of Title I, very basic. We're going to kind of cover allocations, applying for funds, fiscal responsibilities, program requirements, and then monitoring. Normally, this would be almost a day's training, but we are going to condense it into 3 hours. We would possibly look at GMAP applications in the afternoon if we were all together, but we did the technical assistance last. So let's go ahead and start with the program purpose. So Title I Part A, and this is something I've learned just since I've been at the department. The name of the grant is Improving Basic Programs because it is the largest federal program that supports elementary and secondary education. And there are supplemental resources that help ensure us that we want all children to have a fair, equal, and significant opportunity to obtain a high quality education. And I think everyone, when they think of Title I, that is the game changer. It is to equalize and provide all students that opportunity to get a high quality education. It also has support and resources that are provided to achieve proficiency on challenging academic achievement standards and assessments at the state level. So years ago with No Child Left Behind, it was utilized to equalize that playing field for our state assessments, and so that all students could reach proficiency. Also, resources are targeted to districts and schools that have the greatest need. It is a school-based program, and it's meant to be utilized at the school level so that schools can make decisions about what services will most influence student outcomes. It is funded through the Department of Ed first, and then it is funneled down to the local education agency. And at that point, the districts then allocate the funding to the schools. It's very important that the district and the schools have consultation. That is required during this time of developing the GMAP application. And that can look different ways. You know, you want to make sure that you're getting all your stakeholders, not just at the school level, but at the community level as well. They need to have some voice and provide some feedback during the application process and even the pre-planning before we actually begin to work on the application. You need to have those consultations. Also, after the application is approved, during the implementation of the grant throughout the year, and then at the end, you need to evaluate that program to see if what you were looking at on your needs assessment, you were able to accomplish with the funding source. So what is a Title I coordinator role at the district level? Well, to provide oversight for the entire program. And it is a beast when you think about how large Title I is. The state receives about $220 million, and then that funding is allocated to districts, and then it then funnels down to the school. So as a Title I coordinator, one of your main roles is to have that consultation with the public and with your private and home schools. Consultation should have already occurred for the 2021 school year. Usually that begins to take place around February, March. Start wrapping it up, getting those, your notification of letter, your notification letter and your participant survey needs to get in the private and homeschool hands so that you can see who would like to have some participation with Title I. And from that point, you have your consulting meetings to determine what those programs are going to look like with the private and homeschools. Also, you're going to implement and manage and evaluate at the district level, and you also have to implement and manage if you have public and private schools, private schools and homeschools that are going to receive funding. A big headache, but something that has to take place, is compliance with all the federal statutes and regulations. And those include allowability of costs, parent and family engagement, and stakeholder collaboration. And it's wise to look at those federal statutes and regulations quite often. You can go to USED and search Title I Part A, ESSA, and it will pull up all of those federal statutes and regulations. Also handy on the Title I webpage is we have the Title I handbook, and it does hit a lot of those topics and provides you a lot of guidance, which is very important. It also gives you a year at a glance for a Title I coordinator. I've actually printed that out, and keep it handy because it kind of gives me that month to month of what I should be doing or what should be on my radar. Also, some internal collaboration needs to occur. Developing that relationship with the finance staff, because you will be working with them tremendously and often when you are developing a budget and then overseeing that budget and expenditures. One thing that we notice is that districts need to have that collaboration with their homeless coordinator. There should be a designated homeless coordinator. It may be you, but it may be someone different in your district. It's very helpful to have that collaboration, especially since that is going to be a required allocation in district set aside. Need to make sure you collaborate with principals. You need to know what their needs are at the building, how they're going to utilize this funding source, and actually work with them on developing that budget. It's sometimes helpful at the district level to work with principals so that they know how they can utilize that funding to make the most difference with our children and their achievement. And then, of course, your superintendent always wants to be involved. David, do you have anything you want to add on a coordinator role that I've kind of left out?
No, not at this point.
Okay. Anybody have any questions?
Nothing in the chat box so far, but.
Okay. Okay. And please tell me if I'm going too fast. I can slow down. If you want to have a conversation, just jump in. We're as informal as possible. So we're kind of at our first section where we would actually have a stop and think, and you would have those conversations with your table mates, but of course we're pretty isolated. So if you could jot down who you collaborate with currently. If you're new, you may just now be thinking about that. Who would you think you need to collaborate with? But if you've been doing it for a year or two, who have you collaborated with? And how often do those collaborations take place? What are some of the topics that you talk about or you try to address? And I'm anxious to hear what kind of methods you have for getting committees or working with councils or having meetings. And I feel like that this is going to be something that's going to look totally different as we move forward for the next maybe year or so. How are you getting that stakeholder feedback when we're unable to have the type of meetings that we're used to. And I tell you what we'll do, we'll kind of break for about probably about 2 minutes, and we'll come back and we'll open the floor for some sharing. Does anyone out there want to unmute and maybe share with us some things that you feel are working for you, or maybe something that you feel like you need to strengthen when it comes to collaboration? Well, David, do we have anything in the chat box?
Nope, I don't see anything in the chat box.
Okay. Well, I will share a little bit that I feel is important, and that we kind of see as we're out monitoring. The relationship and the collaboration that needs to occur between the coordinator and the finance officer is crucial. The coordinator develops the budget, and usually that's in conjunction with working with the finance officer. And once that budget is put into GMAP, then those conversations need to continue between the coordinator and the finance officer, because sometimes budgets change. As we probably noticed in March, as you look at last year's FY20, there's probably some expenditures that didn't occur. So you're going to have those conversations with the finance officer, determine how you can utilize those unspent funding sources, or what you've budgeted that didn't occur in the spring, and just making sure that what's in Munis reflects what's in GMAP. Does anybody have a way that they were able to have some shareholder feedback this spring that was kind of maybe very creative or thinking outside the box that you would like to share? No one? Okay. Well, we will continue on, but please feel free to jump in at any point if you feel like that you have a question or you'd like to share something.
Brenda.
Yes.
This is Sherry Satterley from Danville. How are you?
Hey, Sherry, I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I just wanted to reiterate for anybody that this is their first go round. I'm not new, but I've always learned something from this, so I still signed up. I would just reiterate the relationship with the finance officer, just because in my experience, not being a payroll person, I have learned through this that things come out that you may not have budgeted for in payroll, if that makes sense. Like if you put money aside for subs, for example,
right,
but you've only budgeted Medicare, retirement, and all those things for your salaried people, then that will be overexpended very quickly. And I know the bottom line doesn't necessarily have to match GMAP with the budget, but that means money's being taken away from other things if you don't budget enough. And I found myself having to adjust that for subs and for other certified pay not included in a contract, things like that. So I would get real tight, not just with my finance director, but with my payroll expert as well.
There you go. Yes, that's a very good point, because a lot of times we don't think about those fringe benefits when we are budgeting, and your payroll clerks will kind of keep you legal. They'll kind of come back to you and say, hey, don't forget, because with the federal grant, all those have to be taken care of through that grant, correct?
Yes. And another thing that I found myself, not just those fringes that come out on everybody, but if you have an employee that waives health insurance and chooses the flexible spending benefit instead, which is, I think, like $2,100 for the entire school year. I do a spreadsheet that I share with my payroll person, and she fills in my blanks for me. Well, I didn't have a column for the flexible spending benefit because I just had a health insurance column. And then I noticed this flexible spending benefit was coming out because so-and-so waived health insurance and had this instead. And if, again, I'm not a payroll expert, so I didn't know that was supposed to be there. And I'm sure a lot of people are in the same boat that I'm in. So it's just, to me, the payroll person is important also.
Yes, it very much so. Also, I would sit down, whoever is going to, I guess, reimburse the grant at the district level, we would always sit down and go through each person and look at what grant was covering that person's salary. And that kind of gave me an idea of knowing how much to budget when I would get ready to do a new application based on the personnel that we had last year. That was always really helpful. I would just sit down and sometimes it's HR, sometimes it's finance, but they do that, the federal reimbursement. And that just would always help me figure out planning ahead, especially at the district level. Not as easy at the school level because those people change and they may go a different route. But at the district level, those were pretty static numbers, and I could use those.
And I hate to dominate the chat, but another thing to think about is also when open enrollment comes around, your schools need to be prepared with the fact that if somebody changes their health insurance in January, that those numbers may change as well.
Very hard to predict, but something that you have to be on the lookout for. And I think as a new coordinator, that would be so helpful, because these are little things that you may not know starting out, and you learn the hard way. So good points, Sherry. Does anybody have anything else about collaborating and I'm glad, Sherry, you're on, because it's always helpful to have somebody who is not brand new that can share some ins and outs with us today, because trust me, I'm not an expert in Title I. That's not my my area of being on top of everything, but I'm learning as I go. David's the expert, but it helps to hear at the district level from an expert.
Brenda, just as a big picture, I would say you could, as far as collaboration and conversations, look at the first page of your GMAP application, and there's a question, maybe two, about areas of collaboration and where they should be occurring. So that could give you some information about what direction to at least start thinking about directing your conversations. That might include anything from school staff and community and parents to district administrators of other federal and state programs.
Yes, because the whole point of having the consolidated application is to have those conversations with the other federal grants to see how they can support each other, which is important.
Hi.
Anybody have anything else? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is Amy from Boone County. I was new this past year, and one of the things that I found helpful was gathering my finance department together and actually kind of walking them through GMAP, and how budgets come to be based on those per pupil amounts. I don't think they really understood that and thought we could just add money to allocations for the schools, based on how we saw fit, and that it didn't, that it comes from those free and reduced numbers that then create a PPA that give them their allocation. So I found that was a little bit helpful when they saw a little bit of my side, and then I could see a little bit of their side. So
that's very good tip there. And not everybody, it is hard to get those conversations going, isn't it, Amy? And to kind of get on the same page, but in the end, if you can, and you can sit down, and I think that's super smart to let them see GMAP and how it all is budgeted within. I would always give our finance officer a printed budget from GMAP, but I think sometimes actually seeing you work in it would probably help the understanding too.
Brenda, we have one question in the chat box.
Okay.
And it says, do we have any suggestions for where to put money in the budget for unplanned expenditures? For example, a school that has submitted a plan, but the final allocation amount was a bit larger than they planned. Where do I put the extra money while they are meeting with their team, but I have to submit the application to meet the deadline? I think, and you might speak to this too, Brenda, so they got a little more money than initially planned. You might want to consult with the school first and see what their biggest uses of funds are. For example, if that's professional development and you're trying to meet the deadline to submit right now, and you don't have everything finalized at this point, maybe you could put a little extra money in professional development. Now you're going to have, the application stays open all the time, so it can be revised at any point in the year. And we're also going to have a point in October where we will get final allocations, and that application will definitely be opened up again for you. I mean, it's open anyway, but you'll get a notice that says you've got a change in allocation and you need to make a revision to the application. So figuring out what their biggest needs are, you could for now put those additional funds in an area like professional development or materials and supplies. And if that changes along the way as planning is finalized and as allocations are finalized, then at any point you can make a change to that application.
Something else to consider, as we know, school may not look like school as we know it when we get ready to go back. So it is hard to plan the unknown, but I think you should have those conversations with schools because, first of all, they know areas of need based on what happened in March when it came to NTI. And so maybe ask them, what were some areas that you struggled with when we first went into shutdown with NTI, because that could be something that the grant could help you with this year. Particularly, we don't know when school's going to start. We don't know what it's going to look like, but you may have schools think about that. They're maybe thinking of what they've always done in the past, and that may not work this year, just with the world that we're currently living in. So, those are conversations to really be having with them, because some districts did receive some additional funds this year. And what do you do with that? I think PD would be a good place, like David said, to place it, to have it as a placeholder, because of course professional development is going to look different. And it may be that you aren't able to utilize that funding right off, but then teachers are going to need it. And so it'd be nice to have it so that if we do open up, that you would be able to send them or get somebody into the district to provide those learning experiences for them. That was a good question. Any more, David?
No, I think that's it right now.
Okay, then let's head on to allocations. So this was something I learned about after coming to KDE in April. And that was one of my first activities that was assigned to me by David, is to learn a little bit about the grant. And I always thought that Title I was one big pot of money, and it is, but it is actually 4 different grants that make up the allocation. And each of those have their own eligibility criteria. And so you have basic grants, you have concentration grants, targeted grants, and the Education Finance Incentive Grants, which is EFIG. So I always thought it was just one big pot, but it is 4 different pots that make the Title I allocation. It is based on a formula child, and that is a student between the age of 5 and 17 and living in poverty. So that is, I would say, the base criteria for all 4 of those grants. When you look at the basic grant, it's a number of formula children that must be at least 10 in the district. There must be at least 10 of them, and more than 2% of the total number of children living in poverty between the ages of 5 and 17. The second grant is the concentration grant, and this is the number of formula children within the district, and it must exceed either 6,500 or 15% of the total number of children that are living in poverty between the ages of 5 and 17. And so that 15% generally is where I guess the concentration grant would be. There's districts that have more than 6,500 students, but even smaller districts, 15% of the total number of children could be between ages 5 and through 17. And to qualify for this, the LEA must meet the eligibility criteria in the current year, or if they've met that criteria at least once in the 4 years prior to the current year. So that's very interesting in that if you do not meet it in the current year and you have at least met it once in the 4 years prior, you would still qualify for that. Falling out of eligibility for this funding source would affect your total allocation. So KDE will contact you if this applies and you were to not receive this concentration grant. The third grant is the targeted grant, and that's the number of children, formula children, and they must be at least 10 in the district and at least 5% of the total number of children ages 5 through 17. And then the last one is the Education Finance Incentive Grant, and that's the number of formula children that must be at least 10 in the district and at least 5% of the total number of children ages 5 through 17. Now I'm going to ask David if he can expound on this a little bit more, as I understand the 4 pots, but David, can you maybe share a little bit about the concentration grant?
Well, I think you hit it on the head. Each of the pots, except for the concentration grant, districts can qualify year to year. But like Brenda said, the concentration grant has that stipulation where you either qualify for that grant in the current year or the previous 4 years. And she is correct. Once we begin to get census numbers in, that usually comes in around mid-December. We will start to look at those grants and poverty percentages. And if you do fall out of that grant, we would definitely let you know, because that could be a significant amount of your allocation. Most districts in the state qualify for all 4 grant pots. We have a few highly affluent districts that qualify for maybe just the basic grant, and not the others. And sometimes districts like that fall in and out of qualification. Currently in the state, every district receives Title I Part A funding, at least from one of these funding pots. And we'll probably continue to do so for the foreseeable future.
As David mentioned, in December, the state receives estimates, okay, based on the Census Bureau. And they look at, I think, quite a few different data points in order to get those estimates of students that or children that are between the ages of 5 and 17, and then the 5 and 17 that are living in poverty. And they use those to determine the base allocations. And those are ratably reduced to make up the state's administration and school improvement funds. So KDE receives the estimate allocation in December, and then at that point, the state's administration comes off first, and then the school improvement funds, in order to develop that grant, actually it comes off the top as well. What districts have to realize is that there is a hold harmless level, and districts will not be reduced below its hold harmless level, and those are generally shared with districts in January. Is that correct, David?
Yeah, around January, we issue, just as a beginning point for planning, a document called Tentative Census and Hold Harmless Notification, which will give you an idea of what your hold harmless would be and where your poverty numbers are.
Now, also, David, I'm sure people are thinking, are those numbers, those poverty numbers, pulled from IC or the Census Bureau? What other data points do they use? Because they don't really come from IC, correct? They would not match.
Yeah, that's correct. The numbers that are used to allocate Title I Part A funding do not come from Infinite Campus. It's not any measurement of average daily attendance. The Census Bureau actually goes in and makes estimates based on community surveys, welfare participation, tax return data, that type of information, to make an estimate of the total population of kids 5 to 17 in every district across the country, and the number of kids in poverty aged 5 to 17. So typically when we issue those notifications in January, what you're going to notice is your poverty percentage will probably be a little bit lower than what you might be able to pull out of Infinite Campus. So a couple things with that. We do ask you in the notification to go through and review the information. You know, that notification provides anything from definitions of how the pots of money are funded, definitions of formula children, an explanation of how those estimates are made, but it also gives you contact information directly for the Census Bureau. to challenge those estimates. And we also give you numbers year to year to compare, so you kind of see how the poverty rate, how it either is increasing or decreasing over time. But I think that contact information is important because US Ed encourages folks to challenge those numbers if they think they are incorrect. The only thing I will say that is we've had a few districts try to challenge that in the past, and really the message from the Census Bureau is, unless they identify some sort of human error in inputting data, they are not going to change those estimates. But it is, it is worth having a conversation if you see maybe your poverty drop 50% from one year to the next. That could be a red flag for you. So we always issue that, encourage you to review those numbers, and then ask questions as needed.
So hold harmless is definitely the rock bottom dollar that a district may receive in any fiscal year. It is a variable, and it's based on last year's allocation. So if 95%, if the census poverty percentage is 30% or greater, you will receive 95% of last year's allocation. If your census poverty percentage is between 15 and 30%, you would receive 90% of last year's allocation. And if you are below 15% poverty percentage, you would receive 85% of last year's allocation. And that's something I learned just to kind of, it guides you in how you would plan, not knowing what your budget's going to be, but you're going to have those stakeholder meetings in, maybe February, March, and you don't have your GMAP application. So it's not in there. You don't know what you're going to be allocated for the coming school year. But if you can have an idea of your hold harmless, it does let you have those conversations with those stakeholders. So in the spring, you're going to get those tentative allocations. They're going to be released to you. And at this point, not all census data is final. We get a lot of questions about that. Once those are released, people are saying, well, is it going to change? Well, it could, because it is not final in the spring. You're going to work on a tentative GMAP application. You're going to complete that, but it's not going to be final. In the late spring, early summer, KDE will get a final allocation with some updated census data, and it's released. And it doesn't, we don't really release that to the districts, do we, David? We just look at it and we kind of calculate those allocations, but there's no communication at that point with the districts. They're still working on the tentative allocation from the spring.
Yeah, that's correct. Like, we got the revised allocation about a week ago or so, and unless we see huge changes in allocations, we're not going to communicate that to districts at that point, because they are in the middle of the application, the tentative application. So we'll just hold on to that unless we see a need to communicate at that point.
Okay. Then the first part of October, the real final is released. And at that point, KDE will calculate and issue this final to the districts. There has been times when GMAP revisions have to occur. You may receive some additional funding. I don't know how often districts receive less. I don't think it's that often, but generally they stay the same. They pretty much hold, or you may be seeing a small bump or increase, which would require you to revise your GMAP application at that time.
Yeah, generally, Brenda, you're right. Their allocations are within a few hundred or a few $1,000s, depending on the size of the district. I also want to say that comparing allocations district to district with your neighbors, for example, is not always an apples to apples comparison, because there are several variables such as poverty percentages, and what we didn't really talk about is in a couple of the formulas that feed Title I, there are some weighted formulas within there. You have hold harmless to consider. So when you're looking district to district, you're not necessarily going to see an apples to apples comparison. For example, if my district dropped $1,000 in allocation, but the poverty level stayed the same, that's not necessarily true for your neighbors, depending on how those variables work out. So the formula is not as simple as applying a per pupil amount to every district, and then every district is kind of increased or decreased by the same amount. There could be decreases and increases with neighboring districts depending on how those variables fall out. Also, in the application of those hold harmless amounts, we take into account the last year's allocation. So if somebody was at a 95 hold harmless last year and they got $100,000, they might see an increase or decrease this year based on changes in formula counts, changes in poverty, which result in changes in hold harmless amounts. And that might not be consistent with what your district is seeing.
All right, we're going to do a little stop and think, and it's a good time to, if you've got a question regarding allocations, but if you've got your little Post-it note handy, a district's current allocation is $1 million. It qualifies for all the funding sources for the Title I allocation, so it's going to get all 4 pots. KDE issues the tentative census numbers that the following winter, and it states that the district's poverty percentage is 31%. So the question is, what will the district's hold harmless percentage and rock bottom allocation be for the next year? And then how would you use this information in your district? And I'm going to go back, show you the hold harmless. So they have $1 million previous budget, and they were at 31% poverty percentage. So based on last year's allocation, what would be their hold harmless? And how could you use that information? Does anybody have an answer?
So somebody said that in the text that the rock bottom dollar, the hold harmless amount in dollars would be $950,000, and that is correct.
Okay.
Their hold harmless percentage would be 95%.
Right.
And again, the way we calculated that is at a hold harmless percentage of 31%, you would qualify for that 95% level hold harmless, which means that your next year's allocation again cannot be reduced
Below.
Below
$950,000.
below $950,000. That's correct. Somebody also said in the text, you can calculate tentative school allocations based on that amount, and that is correct.
Oh, that's, yeah, that is correct. And kind of lets you start having those conversations for the pre-planning phase earlier, instead of waiting towards the end when you get those spring tentative allocations.
Yeah, and I think that's important, Brenda, because USED's timeline on issuing allocations is variable. We've seen allocations issued anywhere from February to April. However, at the beginning of January, if you have the census numbers and your hold harmless in front of you, which we will issue to you, that is a good point to start your planning, particularly if there's some sort of delay in issuing allocations. It's a good idea to start planning sometime in January based on those numbers.
Mm-hmm.
That hold harmless, again, is your guarantee, your rock bottom dollar for the next fiscal year.
Any more questions or comments? We're a quiet group today. Quiet group. All right.
Okay, hold on. We got one that came in the chat box. This question's for other coordinators or anyone that used to be a coordinator. It says, when do you give numbers to your schools? Do you only give them the hold harmless amount? How do you come up with your projections to give schools in the spring? Let's see if any coordinator wants to comment on that, and then we can kind of fill in if we need to, Brenda.
Okay.
So for us, I sort of I created a spreadsheet that mimicked GMAP in figuring out those allocations, and so just kind of estimated what our district set asides, the mandatory ones, would be, and took our free and reduced numbers from February and created some tentative allocations for our principals, because they have to start thinking about staffing and meeting with HR, pretty close to the beginning of April. And so for our Title I schools, that was important for them to know, who they were going to be able to keep and not keep, and thinking about things like that. So we just kind of estimated what our district set-asides were going to be. And then like I said, I made that spreadsheet that then I plugged in our free and reduced numbers, and it gave me, sort of those PPAs. And then I gave it to our assistant superintendent and our deputy superintendent to look at, to kind of figure out if they wanted to go, I know we'll probably get into this later, but like if they wanted to do a grade span, or if they wanted to, go down the district poverty line, or what they wanted to do. And so they kind of made those final decisions before we presented to principals.
Right.
Amy, you also have to take into account private school services. So how do you kind of estimate that up front?
Yeah, so we, our numbers don't typically change with our private schools. So I just, my big thing is that I just overestimate everything, right? Because I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. So, we just kind of inflated a little bit, and just kind of hoped for the best, really. So it worked out a little bit.
Yeah.
I think the messaging has to be, hey, these numbers are going to be close, right? They're not exact. They could change from spring to the fall.
Yes.
But these are our best estimates, at this point in the year.
Right. And so we kind of said the numbers are probably not exact. Things will change. But as far as changing to the point where, it's going to affect your money or impact your budget as far as like a whole person, right, and their cost of their salary, we felt like it was pretty solid in staffing as to who they could keep and not keep, just based on like historical trends.
Right. I think when it comes to personnel, using the hold harmless really helps, because that's what schools really need to plan ahead for, is personnel. PD can fluctuate. You can determine, yes, we can do that this year with the Title I funding, or maybe we don't have enough. We're not going to have enough for this year, but we can maybe put it on the radar for next year. But personnel is something that you really want to budget ahead of time for, or at least I always did.
And Brenda, I think it's important to say that I don't know if there are any other federal programs that have a hold harmless percentage to give you. So in other programs, you may be taking you may be taking a guess about what your amount is going to be in the next year.
Right.
However, you have something solid to start with for Title One.
Yes. You know, if you think about I worked with Title II and Title IV, and we didn't have a hold harmless. There was no pre-planning. You could look at what you received last year, but generally it was not the same amount, or, I mean, it varied. Of course, it was a variable, but you didn't know that you were going to receive at least 90% of that. You had no idea. There was, that planning was much more difficult to do with those federal grants than it was Title I. Anything else? Okay, so we'll leave allocating the funding and go to applying for funds. So your grant management application planning system, or otherwise known as GMAP, is the application process for Title I Part A, Title I Part D, Title II Part A, Title III, which would be our English learners, Title III Immigrant, Title IV Part A, and Title V, which is the rural and low income. And that is a consolidated application. And for me, this was probably the hardest thing to navigate when it came to the grants, and understanding that these grants must be applied for every year. Even though I knew that our district was going to receive Title I Part A, I still had to tell myself, this is my application process for getting the grant for this coming year. And I always had a lot of questions about why were those grants consolidated? Why wasn't Title I Part A over here all by itself, like Career and Technical or Idea B, because they were separate applications in the system of GMAP. And so for me, I always questioned that. But as I realized, and as I worked more in GMAP and worked with the other federal grants, many times Title I Part A and Title II Part A work together, because we use those funds and we combined them in order to do more initiatives at the district level. And also, Title I Part A being a Title V designated rural and low income district, we use those to collaborate, or, to really help each other, support each other. And so therefore that grant had to stay in a consolidated form, because all of those really fit nicely together. They can, your Title III English learners, your, Title I Part A can enhance that grant, in district set aside. So that's why those had to stay together. Learning GMAP is not easy, but the more you get in and you play around with it, the more you are able to feel comfortable in using it. I will say, if you didn't tune into the technical assistance, I think it's loaded on our webpage, but David really goes into great details in the different sections of GMAP, and the help for current page is so essential if you are trying to figure out that section. If you have questions, always go there first, because there's a lot of narrative in those help for current page. I learned a lot on how to navigate GMAP just based on that. And those are updated every year. So they're very current, and they can help you, go through those sections and give you some additional information, which is very important. But yes, I don't think there's not going to be any time soon that those applications are going to be separated, correct, David? They're going to stay consolidated.
Yeah, we've had conversations about doing that. Our main goal in keeping those applications, like Brenda said, was to really kind of push districts to collaborate around those programs because they do serve the same purposes, the same students, and they do complement each other program to program. So yeah, Brenda, I think we've had conversations about that and requests for that, but at this time, I don't think we're going to be separating those applications.
Okay. Also, we've had some questions about Title V. It's not been allocated as of yet into GMAP, and a lot of people were worried that they would not be able to submit their consolidated application by June 30th, but they will be able to, because Title V, since it hasn't been allocated, it would not stop the consolidated process of submitting. But it will, once that funding source is allocated, districts will have to go back in, correct, David, and open up GMAP and build that Title V budget. I mean, application and budget.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct.
Okay, so I do know we've had some questions about that. Last year, about 115 districts qualified for Title V, which was rural and low income, and I would say it'll be somewhere similar to that. I do think that districts do fall in and out of Title V, correct? More so than they do Title I Part A. Everybody receives it, but some districts may receive Title V for a couple of years, and then their poverty levels in rural, I guess it's based on location.
Location and poverty, and yeah, sometimes
Changes.
district fall in and out of that particular grant.
Okay, so if anybody has any questions about Title V, just let us know. Any questions about GMAP so far? All right, then we're going to get into the lovely district set-asides, which is determined at the district level. You do have some mandatory set-asides. Homeless is required. You must provide comparable supplemental services to your homeless students. So you are required to have homeless at the district level. If you have a neglected institution in your district, you must provide comparable services to those students in that local facility if the district serves a facility. If you're in the district set-aside page section and you go into help for current page, GMAP lists the neglected institutions by district. If you are new and you don't know, that would be a good place to look to see. And I meant to, it's hard to, we should have, I don't know if I maybe try to insert a screenshot of that at some point, David. I don't know, maybe that would help, but more than likely, you know that you have a neglected institution, but that information is in help for the current page. Also, parent-family engagement is actually allocated for you in the application, okay? For districts with allocations of at least 500,000, you must set aside at least 1% of that allocation for parent-family engagement, and that would include funds that you have maybe transferred into Title I from another federal grant. If you transfer from Title II or Title IV, then you must make sure that 1% of that total allocation, if you are receiving over 500,000, would be allocated to parent and family engagement. So those are the mandatory set-asides. So let's do a little stop and think. How do you use your homeless set-aside to provide supplemental services to homeless students? I know this is something that districts struggle with on, we're going to allocate money for our homeless population. So what do those supplemental services look like? And who do you collaborate with to make sure that that set aside is spent during the fiscal year for which it is reserved? So you reserve some allocation for homeless, and what services are you going to provide, and who would you collaborate with to make sure that that money is getting spent during that fiscal year? we'll give you a couple of minutes to maybe jot down, think about some ways, and we'd love it if you'd share. Is anyone the homeless liaison as well as the Title I coordinator in your district? Or do you have someone that is designated as the homeless liaison that's different from the coordinator? David, anything in the chat box?
Nothing in the chat box at this point.
Okay. All right.
Sherry Satterley said we have a separate liaison.
Okay. Okay. What we have found in some monitoring is that sometimes there's not a lot of collaboration between the Title I grant, and if you do have a designated homeless liaison, there's not a lot of collaboration there. So at the district level, you may try to look to see how you can get some of those conversations going. Sometimes your homeless liaison is your DPP, and it may be different than the Title I coordinator. So make sure that you try to have those conversations, that you're collaborating, because that funding has to, really needs to get to those students and provide them supplemental services. In the Title I handbook, there's a list of supplemental services that you could provide to that population of students if you need some ideas.
Just a couple comments that were in the chat box.
Okay.
Boone County says they have a separate coordinator as well. Okay. Amy said we have a homeless coordinator. We're trying to use our homeless set aside more effectively, so I'd love to hear ideas from anyone. And then Tracy says ours is the DPP, which a lot of times I think you'll find in your district that your DPP is the homeless coordinator. And if you don't know who that person is, you should make a note to that you need to figure out who that is. I think, Brenda, you're right. Communication is the key around spending these funds. Sometimes we do see lack of communication when there is issue spending that reservation. But communication happens on several fronts. In this case, it's going to be, you're naturally going to be communicating with your homeless liaison that you have these funds available. If you have children that need services, which first and foremost should focus on academic services, but may also focus on things such as providing supplies, and health-related services, things that would allow homeless students to more effectively participate in their education. Those types of things you'll need to have conversations with, and should be expecting some purchase requests out of those funds from your homeless liaison. That homeless liaison is also going to be talking to people in the community, so community partners, which may be shelters or service centers of some type. That person is talking to homeless students' parents, or maybe even homeless students themselves, particularly if those children are classified as unaccompanied youth. Essentially, they have nowhere to go. They don't have a home to go to. Maybe no parents, or they've been kicked out of the home and they're living place to place every night, or they could be living on their own somewhere. So, just making people aware, even at the school level with principals and youth services centers, that those funds are available and are to be spent in the current fiscal year for homeless student services. I think that is really important. Tracy also said ours is the DPP.
We do get some questions about how much do you allocate in the set aside to homeless? And there really is no general formula that would help you determine that. I think you can look at some trend data to see how many homeless students maybe that the district, if you could pull from IC the last couple of years, what's our trend data? I mean, how many homeless students are we averaging? You could then look at your per pupil amount and maybe kind of generate some type of, district formula based on that. And you can look at some of your expenditures that you've had in the past of how you've allocated that funding. And I do wonder with the pandemic if we will see a little bit of an increase in homelessness. I'm not sure, but that would be something to think about, the times that we're living in and some of the economic ramifications that we had with people losing their jobs. And as we start back to school, there may be a little bit more uncertainty of where people are residing. So that may be something to think about.
From the chat, Brenda,
yes,
from Newport, we have a homeless coordinator. Last year, we conducted a needs assessment of our homeless program. Transportation was a huge barrier in our district based on where students may be staying. So we coordinated with the liaison to allocate funds to help students get to and from school each day. And I think that's huge. Homeless children that are identified, they do have the right, if it meets their needs, best meets their needs, to attend their school of origin. So if they live outside of a school's attendance boundaries, for example, but it wouldn't take much to get them to their school of origin, and that placement would be best for their educational, social, emotional needs, then it is absolutely okay and encouraged and required actually to transport them from their living situation to their school of origin. Also from Amy. Amy says ours is typically set aside for transportation as well. I may need to chat with you, Rachel, on how to allocate for this and manage it. And Rachel said, of course. So I think important to know, Brenda, that also the definition of homeless students is very wide ranging under the grant McKinney-Vento that under which these requirements exist. So students, could be anything from, like I said, an unaccompanied youth who does not have a home or parents. So they're just out on their own. It could be a family living in a motel. It could be, they could be living in a park or somewhere else that is not usually designated for people to live. It could be people that are doubled up. So it's a homeless family living with another family, and there may be potentially some financial hardships because of that. So that family that has moved in might qualify for homeless services. In addition, it could be someone that owns a home, but that home is deemed really unfit for human occupancy. And some of the indicators for that might be, for example, in Eastern Kentucky, we'll see homes where there may be an extension cord run from one home to another, because one of the homes does not have electricity, or there may be a lack of running water. You may walk into a home if you're working with these students and find that there are holes in the floor. So the housing is just unfit for someone to really live in. And your homeless coordinator really makes those determinations and identifications. But just to give you an idea of, it's not necessarily a person living under a bridge. It could be somebody that actually has a place to stay, but because of financial hardships or poor living conditions, they could be identified as homeless.
I think in the May webinar, David, didn't we do a little research, and we had a question about what constitutes homeless. So, and there is, don't we have a connect to the web on our web page, the regulation?
Yeah, so we do.
If you have any questions, make sure you look at what actually constitutes a homeless student, because there is a wide range of ways that you would qualify for that. And a lot of times people, they just think of someone living under a bridge, but it's much broader than that. Good conversation regarding that. Any more comments or?
Nothing else in the chat box at this point.
Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and move on to the next district set-asides. That the rest of those set-aside categories are optional. KDE issued a set-aside guidance, and if you don't, it is on our web page, the Title I web page. But if you want to print it out, you have this PowerPoint that is a live link. You can click on it, control click, and it will pull it up for you. It provides you some expectations and some guiding questions pertaining to the reservation and use of optional set-asides. And this is an area that districts have probably more questions about, because as they're planning the Title I budget in GMAP, this is the area that they're going to be monitoring. We love to see money go to schools and for school programs, but we do know that there are times that you have to have some district set-asides. So always remember that Title I is to be intended to be spent at the school level and have a school-based program. Always remember that when you have your set-asides, that you are having some potential risk with circumventing rank order and school council authority. If we're seeing a large amount funded in district set-aside, sometimes we question, did you have some school council approval of that? We don't want you to circumvent that rank order that you have to complete in GMAP. Anybody have any questions so far about those other district set-asides? I think in the technical assistance, we really went through each one of those pretty thorough. All right, ranking and serving your schools. So your local education agencies or districts have the discretion to choose which poverty factors that they're going to use to rank and serve schools and distribute those funds. So you are going to look at different options that you can determine how you want to rank your schools. You can use free and reduced lunch. You can use free meals. You can use temporary assistance for needy families. You can look at Medicaid. You can use the U.S. Census data and the community eligibility provision. You must choose one unless you are a district that is participating in CEP, but it's only in a certain number of schools. and that would be an exception. At that point, you could use CEP for the schools that are participating in the community eligibility provision, and the schools that are not, you could use free and reduced lunch or a different factor, poverty factor. Attendance area or school enrollment is used to determine rank order, and I would say the majority of districts use school enrollment as their numbers to pull. Schools must be served in rank order by poverty percentage. So these are the things that you need to address when you're getting ready to do your rank order and determine school eligibility. Schools that have a higher poverty level must be served with an equal or greater per pupil allocation. So you want to look at your schools that have the highest poverty rate first, and make sure that they are served in rank order. If they are above 75%, they must be served first. If they are below 75%, districts may serve in rank order within a grade span, which is grade span grouping. So you may have schools that are below 75% and you want to do a grade span that all elementary would be served or eligible. So you could choose elementaries at a higher amount than you would choose your secondary schools. There's also the 35% rule, and that's any school that is at or above 35% poverty, they would be eligible to receive an allocation. There's also the district poverty average. Any school at or above the district's poverty average is eligible to receive an allocation. And then you have your grade span, where you're going to target a grade span poverty average to have them eligible to receive an allocation. David, I wanted to ask you, where is the district poverty average located? Is that in GMAP?
Yeah, that would be at the bottom of the school eligibility page.
Okay, okay. Is that given to them, or is it something that when they plug in, it would determine?
Once they start plugging in numbers for their school enrollments and low income accounts, that will be calculated for them.
Okay. Have I missed anything on so far on rank and order and school eligibility?
No, go back a couple of slides. I just want to kind of step back for just a second.
Here?
Ranking
and serving?
Yeah, is that the first? Yeah, that next slide. So I think new folks need to understand that there are certain rules that districts must make choices on.
Okay.
And these are some big choices that they have to make when it comes to allocating money to schools. First of all, they do have to determine a common, like you said, low income measure. And except for certain cases, which you can find some additional information in on the help pages, except in certain situations, that has to be the same poverty measure. Go to the next slide. Generally, schools are ranked from top to bottom, and when we say ranked, we mean that they are put in order by poverty, high to low, and then they are served with per pupil amounts down that poverty line. And we'll give you some examples of that in just a second. But generally, your higher poverty schools are going to get a higher per pupil amount. Okay, there are some rules that you can put into place that might change that a little bit, such as grade span grouping. But in most cases, you serve, a lot of people serve straight down the poverty line, higher per pupil amounts at higher poverty schools, and then lower per pupil amounts as you go down that line. And then go to the next one, Brenda. And then the 35% rule, district poverty average, and grade span poverty average essentially is allowing the district or requiring the district to set a cutoff point where they're going to serve down to. So again, like Brenda said, the 35% rule, you could serve, if you select that in GMAP, you could serve any school at 35% poverty or higher. The district poverty average, the same. If you select that, you're going to use your district poverty average, and that could be 65% poverty. So any school at or above, in that case, 65% poverty would be eligible to receive a Title I allocation. Or you could use grade span poverty average, particularly if you're using grade span grouping. And if that grade span poverty average is 65%, then any school in that grade span at or above 65% could receive an allocation. So again, this is just a cutoff point where you're making a decision that, okay, this is the lowest level that we can serve, lowest poverty percentage where we can serve schools with an allocation. Now, it is possible that you select the 35% rule, but internally, maybe you have a cutoff point that you set at the local level of 50%, and that's okay. We have some districts that select 35% rule, which means any school at or above 35% is eligible to receive an allocation, but they get down to the 50% level and they determine that they can no longer serve schools below that level with an amount of money that would allow them to run an effective Title I program. They can, at that point, make the decision to stop at that 50% level and not serve anybody below that. So there are lots of caveats like that in Title I Part A that we're not necessarily going to address all of them, but that I think is an important one to know. All right, Brenda.
Yes, and David, I would say that in very large districts that have a lot of schools, you will find that 35%, sometimes they can't go that low.
Yeah, right.
They have to choose a cutoff point because they would not have enough funding to go around to make an eligible school-wide program funding wise, to be able to fund that. So anyhow, there is a special rule when it comes to rank and order. If an LEA serves any school with a poverty rate that is below 35%, so it's below 35%, the district must allocate to all of its schools a per pupil amount at least 125% of the district's allocation per low income child. And in this case, the minimum PPA will be automatically calculated on the PPA list page for you in GMAP. So that if you are going to serve any school that is below that 35% poverty rate, then you must make sure that you follow those guidelines, and it will be calculated for you on the list page in GMAP.
Yeah, Brenda, I think this is not going to apply to very many people.
I was going to say.
In most cases, this applies to highly affluent districts where they may not even have schools that meet that 35% rule. So they may be using, for example, district poverty average to set that cutoff point. And the district poverty average might be 20%.
I was going to say 20 or 22 or something like that. Okay.
So in those cases where they can't even get to that 35% rule, they are going to be required to apply that minimum PPA, which the system calculates for them.
Okay.
I know that's kind of that's a very high level explanation of that rule. But I
Mhm.
think it's important to know that if you are one of those districts, the GMAP system does the work here for you. And it's also important to know that if that minimum PPA applies in your district, it has to apply to every school, not just those that are under that
Below.
35% mark.
Right. So it would be all of the schools.
Correct.
Okay. Any questions so far on this, David? To me, this is very, in the application process, is one of the most complicated pieces, I think.
Yeah, and I think we've done a lot of work on the help pages. That is the school program description page, I believe. And we've done a lot of work to define each one of those rules and tell you what each one of those choices actually mean and how to apply them to your particular district. So that's an area where you're making some big decisions. The rules are kind of confusing, and we've put a lot of work into defining those things for you. So I think in this section it's important, really, as a takeaway, to know that you have to choose a measure for low income counts. You have to set a cutoff point for your schools. And then you're going to have to also determine whether you're going to serve them straight down the poverty line or use something called grade span grouping, which we got a couple slides that demonstrate that for you.
Right. Yeah. Let's see if we can put this into practice. So we're going to rank and serve. This is our district. We have elementary school A, who's at 79% poverty level. School B, elementary, is at 65%. We have a high school that's at 62%. We have one middle school at 60% and an elementary school C at 57%. So let's look at different ways that we could rank and serve those schools in our district. So if you look at grade span ranking, they're going to serve the elementary schools, even though elementary school C is at 57% poverty level, lower than your high school and your middle school. They've determined that the greatest need is to intervene early, okay? And so therefore they're going to rank school A and school B that are 65% or higher with a $900 per pupil amount, $900 per pupil amount. And then elementary school C, who is sitting at a 57% poverty level, they're going to do a $750 per pupil amount. They're not going to allocate any funding to the high school or the middle school. And that would be a grade span ranking where they are truly looking at the elementaries in their district.
Yeah, and this kind of sets out one scenario where a district might apply grade span grouping. You know, it could be possible that they wanted to serve all their schools and use grade span grouping for some reason. In this case, the reason might be because that elementary school falls at the bottom of the ranking, and they may not be able to get to that elementary school if they go straight down the poverty line because they run out of dollars. So, but it is possible that they could reduce those elementary school PPAs and be able to serve the high school and middle school. Again, that's determined based on needs and
needs assessment.
And available dollars. But in this case, if they decided only to serve elementaries because they think they're going to get the best bang for their buck by targeting kids early on, they effectively can skip the high school and middle school here in the rankings.
And those are truly district decisions, correct?
Yes, those are absolutely district decisions.
All right, so if you look at district-wide ranking, is where you're going to just essentially go down by rank order. I would say you're going to look at Elementary school A is at 79% poverty. Elementary school B is at 65%. And then your high school is going to come in at 62, your middle school at 60, and your elementary C is going to be in at 57%. And they essentially just rank them from the highest percentage of poverty level to the lowest and determined per pupil amount for that. They had some cutoffs for that.
Yeah, I think it's important to also note that if you are ranking like this, straight down the district-wide ranking, elementary school A has to get either the highest per pupil amount,
because they're above 75.
Yeah, because they're above 75%, or they have to receive no less than the schools beneath it. And the reason for that is, it goes back to one of your rules. Schools that are above 75% must be served in rank order and cannot be served by grade span grouping unless they fall within that grade span.
So David, this is just a question from me. Mm-hmm. Elementary school A, who is above 75%, I know they have to have at least the amount of those lower than them, but should they have more where they're above 75%? Like, should it be like 650 per pupil amount? Not
necessarily. Again, that's a district decision. As long as they do not get any an amount that is less than the schools below them, that is okay.
Okay. Any questions so far before we head on to alignment?
Nothing in the chat so far.
Okay. So we do get a lot of questions about GMAP and Munis and the fact that they must align. And applications are developed in GMAP. Those budgets are developed, and at that point, it is handed over to the finance officer. They put those budgets in Munis. And so, of course, we at the state level would love for those to align, and they must align. So it takes a lot of pre-planning and collaboration on the front end. It helps if you work with finance up front. It kind of reduces some of that burden in the future of them not aligning. If you have those conversations, this is what our schools have completed a needs assessment. This is how they want to spend their money. This is what we want to do at the district set aside level. And so once you develop that application, Munis must mirror it, because there is statute and regulation that says we must do so. So once you get your application approved by your consultant, you have to follow that application. So what you say you're going to do in that application needs to occur throughout the year. You need to make sure that the activities that you've put in your application are allowable. So they need to follow that allowability. And I'm sure we're going to talk about that a little bit more. And in your plan, you need to make sure that your rank and serve rules are being followed and that you are compliant with all other regulations. And when we are doing monitoring, this is an area that we do see that GMAP and Munis sometimes doesn't align. So you need to make sure that when you're developing that application and it's approved, that you follow it. And we do know that districts have to make some changes, but that's when you would have a revised application. And revisions do occur. I know at the district level, we don't like revising the application because it's a lot of work, but they can be made at any point during the year so that you can reflect what's going on in GMAP is going to reflect what is happening in Munis. So when would you be required to revise your application? Well, in October, if funds are allocated or you receive your final allocation and it has changed, at that time you would revise your application. If you're going to reallocate funds within GMAP, maybe you've decided we're not going to need as much in professional development because in the district set aside, because schools ended up using some school level funding, and so you want to move that from PD into something else. If a district moves Title I Part A funds, which causes a change in your district set aside, for me that was always hard because when I would revise the budget, it would always affect another section. And I would always have to remember that they all work in sync with each other. If you move Title I Part A funds and you have a change in a school allocation, you would have to have a revision. If you make significant changes in the types of activities that you're going to carry out, for example, you were going to have professional development activities, but you decide to move that to parent and family engagement activities, that would cause a revision. Anytime there's misalignment between GMAP and MUNIS, you are going to have to revise. You have to develop a process where you are regularly aligning GMAP and MUNIS. And I've talked to some districts that do that well. And they shared with me that the Title I coordinator and the finance officer meet monthly to make sure what's in GMAP is being carried out and it mirrors what's in MUNIS. And I think that goes back to that collaboration. And if you can build it in the beginning, it makes it so much easier throughout the year that you can have those. Another thing you could possibly do is at the school level. You could monitor if you have someone run your MUNIS, funding, or I'm trying to think, oh gosh, my age is starting to show here. Your budgets, your MUNIS budgets at the school level, you can have those conversations with principals to make sure that they are spending the money and it is mirroring what they had decided to do in GMAP, mirrors what's happening at the school level in MUNIS. Any questions on GMAP and MUNIS alignment? Anybody have any great ideas of ways to make that happen? Okay, we'll move on to district fiscal responsibilities. So technically, the funding that you receive for fiscal year 21 should be spent during this school year. It needs to be spent on the students that are going to school and to improve their education and their student achievement. But there are times when you do not spend all of that money. So Title I does have a 50% carryover limitation. Districts are allowed to carry over, but no more than 15% of a fiscal year's allocation into the next. So that is through a waiver process. You would have an initial period of 15 months to meet that limitation. So for the 2021 school year, which would be July 1, 2020, you are going to have until September 30th of 2021 to expend this allocation. Now, if you have not been able to expend it, you're able to request once every 3 years to carry over that limitation. David, is there anything else I need to stress about this? The carryover?
Let me see the next slide real quick and I'll
Okay.
tell you. Yeah, go back
Kind of
to
going to CARES.
go back to the previous.
Okay.
So yes, you will see us issue some reminders once in a while about that 15% carryover, and it's not because we are harping on you, but that requirement actually carries a penalty with it as well. So let's say for 2021, you don't spend down to the 15% level. And let's say you're $50,000 shy of meeting that 15% carryover level. As a state, we are required at that point to reduce your next fiscal year allocation by $50,000. So what we do with those dollars is we would reallocate those to other school districts based on needs. So again, we're not trying to harp on you when we tell you about this or when we send out reminders about the 15-month carryover limitation. We are actually trying to look out for you and make sure that you avoid that carryover penalty in the next fiscal year.
That was something I didn't realize, that there was a penalty until you explained that to me, and I'm not sure that districts realize that. I mean, you would hate to give money back, so it's important to try to get as close to spending down to zero as possible. We know that, especially in what happened in March, it probably has made it harder this year to get zeroed out. And so therefore that kind of leads into the CARES Act waiver, which was introduced in April. And the CARES Act provides funding flexibilities to support continued learning for Title I and Part A through two different means. If you look at the 18-19 funds, which would be Project E, it's going to extend those funds availability through September 30th of 2021. So if you had Project E funds that should have wrapped up in September of this year, they're going to be extended through September 30th of 2021. Also, it's providing a relief from that 15% carryover limitation requirements for Project F funding. So for the 1920 project funds, which would be Project F, it's going to allow districts to request a carryover limitation waiver more than once in a 3-year period. David, how do they ask for a waiver?
So essentially they would send an email to me that explains that they are requesting that waiver for whatever fiscal year it is, that they plan, that here's the reason for the excessive carryover amount, and here's their plan on spending those dollars out. And at that point, we would just issue an approval or ask some follow-up questions as needed. And then we keep an ongoing list of those waivers that have been requested year to year.
All right, thank you. I know that a lot of times your finance officer really, if you're working closely together, they kind of give you a heads up that, you know, you need to make sure that you're nudging your schools along in their expenditures so that you don't have to ask for that waiver. We're going to go ahead and do a stop and think. So what processes do you have in place that ensure that that carryover limitation is met within the first 15 months of the grant cycle? So do you have a process in place? And who does it involve? Is there more than just you, the coordinator? And what steps are taken? If anybody would like to share, if they've got a really good protocol that kind of keeps all the conversation going, we'd love to hear it. Or you can share on the chat. David, do we have anything in the chat?
Nothing yet.
Okay. All right. Maybe no one really is close to asking for a waiver.
Well, I think, Brenda, the key is communication with finance. They also need to be informed of what the requirement is and what the penalty is. So you might have a conversation with them, and they might be able to, if you don't know if there's a protocol, and I like that word protocol because it doesn't necessarily have to be a procedure in your procedure manual. But they may be able to tell you what that protocol is, and then you could set up some ongoing conversation with them or revisit that during administrative meetings. Just so you know, you're continually keeping in touch and on top of that requirement.
I agree. I think, you know, just always making sure that that money is spent. I mean, that was ingrained. I'm going back, you know, when I was an old principal, the money that's allocated should be spent on the kids for that year. And if you think of it in that way, you probably don't have, unless something like an extraordinary thing happens, kind of like COVID-19. Generally, I think the money is spent by that September 30th. All right, let's go to comparability. So districts must prove that the services that are funded through state and local funds are comparable in all of its schools. So in October, November, we look at doing a comparability report. This report's going to compare student and staff ratios or school to school salary comparisons to make sure that everything is comparable. It'll look at that report's going to have accounts for staff paid from local and state dollars. And David, I don't know a lot about comparability because I haven't been around long enough to be involved in those reports. I do think they're required in the fall.
Yes, yeah, you're correct. We do those each fall. So the requirement around that is that local and state funding has to be distributed equitably, and districts have to demonstrate that through a report annually. The goal is to show that minus any federal dollars whatsoever, that state and local dollars are again distributed equitably, and the report is, once you get into it, is fairly simple. There is some data collection you have to do for that and maintain, either that student staff ratio data or school salary data. But that's submitted every fall through GMAP as an upload into the system. And then our consultants will use a checklist to go through and determine whether or not you've accurately met comparability. The goal is to essentially ensure that no Title I school is shorted state and local dollars just because they receive federal allocations. And that kind of goes along with supplement, not supplant, which is on the next slide. But that is just one of the fiscal tests that districts are held accountable for each year.
So like a check and balance, essentially.
Yeah, it's a check and balance, correct.
Okay. And do we, like before the comparability report needs to be submitted, do we try to talk about that in maybe a webinar for coordinators who haven't done it before, to try to do a little bit of training?
Yes, we do. We
Okay.
try to do that. We actually walk them through some of the components. We've done
Okay.
videos in the past as well to kind of walk them through each page and explain each page of that report.
Okay. Which then kind of goes into supplement and not supplant. And Title I funds must be used to supplement funds that would be available from state and local sources absent of federal funds. And I believe it was in 2016 when the United States Department of Ed issued some changes in supplement and not supplant. They wanted to look at compliance. So they wanted schools and districts to have a methodology about how they're going to supplement federal program funding while not supplanting it. And that methodology must show that the district distributes state and local dollars and services to all schools in a Title I neutral fashion. So the methodology expectations is that you must account for that distribution of state and local funds, including staff, resources, and services such as professional development, in a Title I neutral manner. You've got to include all state and local funds that the district uses for the education of students. You have to reflect your staffing and services allocations with real calculations and numbers to support it. And a lot of times it's basing on your staffing allocation that you already provide to KDE. It's need to have a narrative that explains your methodology, and it must be supported with documentation. If you want to look at ESEA section 8306A6B and 34 CFR 76730, 76.731, it tells you the type of documentation that you must have. David, can you expound a little bit more on supplement, not supplant?
Yeah, actually, the changes came about through statutory revisions under ESSA. It used to be that districts had to account for supplement, not supplant, on a expenditure by expenditure basis. So they would have to evaluate every single Title I Part A expenditure to make sure that it met 3 criteria under supplement, not supplant, and that is not the case anymore. This methodology is intended to be done one time, and unless the way you distribute funds to schools, funds and services to schools changes, the only thing really you have to update is staffing formulas that show actual numbers of staff, and maybe dollar amounts that are distributed from other funding sources as well, state and local funding sources as well. So, once you write up your narrative, unless that narrative changes in how you're going to distribute funds, then the only thing you're updating each year is actual numbers, dollar amounts, and staffing numbers. So we do not collect these every year. It's something that the district must adhere to and keep on file in case any auditor or monitoring team comes in to take a look at for Title I. But otherwise, we do not take these or collect these unless we are monitoring.
Okay, that was my question. So really, essentially, they're developing a protocol that would have these expectations included in it, and then they would just update it if their staffing allocation changed or, different numbers within it, but otherwise they would just keep it on file, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, currently districts are following formulas and to distribute dollars and staffing, and like I said, unless those change,
Right.
the only thing they're updating is numbers at that point.
Okay. And a lot of people ask, what needs to be included in that narrative? And so you would make sure that you explain your staffing and funding sources in that methodology and how the funds were distributed. And for example, if certain funds are allocated on a rotational basis or they're combined and assigned through a per pupil amount, you would need to explain that. A lot of, you look at your SBDM allocated funding at the school level, you would explain which year's enrollment's being used for those calculations, make sure it's clearly labeled, and affirm how those funds and staff are distributed according to the methodology.
And Brenda, a lot of times people already have working documents in place that can be used as part of this documentation.
Right.
A lot of people do, spreadsheets for allocations.
Yes, that's what I was thinking.
And those things, are already in place. So it's not like you have to reinvent the wheel here. You're essentially using what you have, plus providing a narrative and some numbers to document that you're meeting that requirement.
Okay. Generally, those are, I would say, the staffing allocations approved every spring at the district level by the local board, and that would probably drive your narrative because they're going to talk about what funding sources those are coming from in that allocation.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions on this?
Nothing in the chat.
Okay. All right. So some exclusions from this would be that you would not have to have that protocol established if you were one school district. So you would be exempt as a whole. So you are a K through 12 school district. If you have a grade span with a single school, that single school grade span would be exempt. Or if the district serves all the schools with Title I allocations, they would be exempt as a whole because every school is being served. If all the schools within a grade span are served, then that grade span would be exempt. So like, let's say a district chose to serve elementary, then the elementary would be exempt from the methodology, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And I think that was put in place sort of as a, sort of as the carrot there, to get people to serve more schools, that if you served all your schools, you could just forget about this requirement altogether.
Okay.
At least for this program. Now, I will say that supplement, not supplant, applies to other federal programs, although it applies differently. So these exclusions and rules that we're presenting today apply only to Title I Part A. Yeah, okay. They do not cross to other programs.
Okay. Glad that you clarified that because that's very helpful. So these are just for Title I Part A. Okay. All right. We're going to look at some additional program requirements, and I know we're getting close to our 3-hour mark, so we're going to try to keep moving. So you have targeted assistance, and you also have school-wide. We don't have as many targeted assistance school programs as you may think. The majority of the districts offer school-wide. This chart shows you the difference between the two programs. With your target assistance, you're going to see that those services and resources have to target only the students that are identified most at risk, whereas school-wide, you can be designed to help at-risk students, but you can also include whole school initiatives. And the school-wide plan will describe those services that are going to be implemented. For targeted assistance, only eligible students may participate in those Title I funded initiatives, and all students in a school-wide can participate in Title I funded initiatives. The difference between targeted assistance and school-wide is the use of funds have to be consistent with specific Title I for targeted, and the use of funds must be consistent with specific Title I rules and a school-wide plan for a school-wide program. The difference between staff for targeted assistance, only staff implementing the Title I program may participate, whereas in a school-wide, all school staff are eligible to participate in those professional learning opportunities. So if you're targeted assistance, only those that are affiliated with Title I may participate in a Title I funded professional learning opportunity. And the school must implement parent-family engagement, compact policy, and requirements for just the families of participating students with your targeted assistance, whereas if you're school-wide, you can target and essentially offer that for all your families. I think there's about, was it 8 districts that had targeted assistance schools? I'm trying to remember.
I think there were only 8 targeted assistance schools. In the whole state.
Yeah. So everyone pretty much looks at the school-wide program, I think, just because it is beneficial to all students. Anything else, David, you want to add before we get into parent-family engagement?
Just one point of clarification. If you do have a targeted assistance school, you are essentially creating a list of your lowest achieving students, and then from that list you're using some multiple educationally related criteria to identify and then select students to be served with targeted assistance services. There is, if you do have a targeted assistance school and you see that there would be benefit to serving that school, you might be able to apply for a waiver to serve it as a school-wide program. So here's the main one of the biggest differences, or what determines whether you have a targeted assistance school or a school-wide program. A school-wide program is a school that is 40% or higher poverty. And generally, your targeted assistance schools are between 35% poverty and 39.9% poverty. So if you have one of those targeted assistance schools, you could consider serving it as a school-wide program, which is allowable under statutory waiver. We did just issue some information about that through a couple of the Monday emails to superintendents. So those emails that come from Interim Commissioner Brown to superintendents. And we try to follow up with each one of those notifications through direct email. But if you are not receiving those notifications, it might be useful to ask your superintendent if those could be forwarded to you. Sometimes those get lost in the shuffle, and they contain important information across all types of different programs that you may be involved with.
Thanks, David. I'm glad you answered that, because I was wondering what was the difference in the percentages for targeted versus school-wide. So now I know. Thank you. So moving on to parent-family engagement. Those activities fall into two general categories at the school and district level. So you need to have provided some notice and some information regarding the education of the students, the right to participate, the request teacher qualifications, and the 4-week notice. Generally, those probably occur at the beginning of the year, either in a letter that is sent home or possibly in the handbook, if the district has a handbook, providing notice to parents of students that would be receiving Title I at their school, that there's a right to participate and that parents can request teacher qualifications and the 4-week notice for substitutes. And then implementing activities that engage parents and families in the community and in their children's education. And a lot of those occur in Title I family nights at the school level. All districts and schools that accept funds have required activities that must be conducted with parents. So some examples of those would be consulted on the use of parent and family engagement funds. The parents need to be involved in the development of the Title I program, so they need to be an essential part of your stakeholder group. They also need to be involved in that program evaluation at the school level, and usually that occurs at the end of the year through surveys, and being involved in the development of the district and school level policies and school compacts. So those are things that are required activities that have to be conducted with parents. And that's why money is set aside and districts set aside to make sure that these activities occur. David, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Just back to that 4-week notice, that could be issued at any point during the school year. The
Okay.
requirement around that is to, anytime you have a class that in a Title I school that is not taught by someone that meets certification standards,
right,
for 4 consecutive weeks, you would have to issue
a
to
letter.
the parents of students in that class a notice that says, hey, we've got this teacher that does not meet certification standards.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what his or her qualifications are. And then here's what we're doing to rectify the situation. And you include some contact information for yourself in that letter as well. That may be sent out from the school level, but you need to keep track of those issues, whether you put that on the principal's responsibility list or you're keeping track of that yourself. Mm-hmm. That happens a lot of times when, for example, a teacher goes on maternity leave for several weeks. Mm-hmm. And the district has trouble finding maybe a substitute for that class that has certification in that area. So in that particular case, the school or the district would need to issue that 4-week letter if that is ongoing for 4 consecutive instructional weeks.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say there is a sample of that letter in our Title I handbook. Okay. Along with the other notifications as well, that are basically you download it, you fill in the blanks, and it's ready to go for you.
Right, it's a good template. Also, as a Title I coordinator, you could work with HR because you're not always going to know when there's a maternity leave and who's filling that position during those weeks. So you might want to have a conversation with HR so that they know to let you know that that's occurred. And that way, usually the principal will let you know, but it really is kind of like a triad. It's the principal, the coordinator, and HR to make sure that those notices get out. All right, we're at a stop and think. So what type of district and school parent-family activities do you have locally? And what challenges do you face? And how are you addressing those challenges? I would think parent-family engagement challenges have just multiplied in the last 4 or 5 months. So I'd be interested to hear what you did this spring, and if you have got some ideas for the fall.
Brenda, typically this is where districts like to hear from each other about challenges and how they tackled those challenges. And please don't be afraid to share here or ask a question of the group. Put it in text if you want to, and I'll read it and see if we get responses. But this is the #1 area where we have recommendations and findings, and we do understand that it is a very tough situation trying to get parents into buildings, to meetings, and those types of things. And it's just been amplified by our current situation. Mm-hmm. So if anybody has, even an example of something that they are going to try to do under the current situation,
we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, we'd love to hear those things.
Well, if they do have some good ideas and they want to share them later on, shoot either David or myself an email, and we can include it in the newsletter, because we're always looking for ideas of examples to provide that PFE at the district level and school level. And I do know that districts are always, curious about this. Well, what are you doing in your district? What's working? What's not working? So if you don't mind, just shoot us an email if you've got a fantastic way of getting some of that engagement going. We'd
Brenda,
appreciate it.
We've had one comment come in through the chat. It says, from Ricky, we have learning lab opportunities for our parents to come to the schools with a certified teacher to work with the family and students with supports for our reading and math programs. We offer 2 locations for our families to attend to try and get into our local communities. And I think that hits on one really important point, and really the main goal of parent and family engagement is to build, not only involve them in some of the decision making, but when it comes to the activities with kids, for example, it's really to build parent skills and abilities to work with their children at home. So that's probably, more important than ever at this point. And if you aren't doing those types of activities, think about the shutdown and how that affected school, and really, how can parents operate at home under these types of conditions should probably be something that you are really thinking about and carrying out with Title I. It's a prime opportunity, not to have to spend other program dollars on these types of activities when it's already required under this program, and there's definitely going to be a need for it. I will say it was increasingly difficult for me as a parent during the shutdown to try to work with my children while I had phone calls and emails coming in at the same time. So, you might think of providing anything from like how to schedule your day, if you're trying to work from home, and provide some assistance with schoolwork. You might survey parents on what their needs are around that. You may find out also that they got into the math homework, and let me tell you, I have a master's degree like probably everybody else here, and several of you have more than that. And math was so hard for me, especially when, questions were coming rapid fire, or sometimes even just intermittently, and I had to stop and think. So that was really hard. So building parents' skills around being able to work in remote learning conditions could be a huge focus for you this year with Title I, and something that would absolutely be needed and allowable under the program.
Thanks for sharing that, David, because I can only imagine what that was like, and the unknown of how much we will be doing that in the fall. You know, we don't know what school's going to look like. Are we going to actually be able to go back and actually start school, or are we going to be in TI? Are we going to alternate? So knowing that this funding source is acclimated to providing those parent-family activities, you know, you may put more money in it this year than you normally would to try to address some of those challenges. So just if you come up with some really good ideas, share them with us. We'd love to get it out to the masses. And, you know, of course, everybody always wants to know, well, what are you doing in your district? And it just is, it's helpful to hear how it occurs. So private school services, Title I Part A has its own equitable service requirements, and other programs have equitable service requirements that are covered under Title VIII of ESSA. Now, there is sometimes some misunderstanding that Declaration of Participation packet that is for other federal programs includes Title I. It does not. So sometimes districts feel like that Declaration of Participation packet, when they send it out, is covering Title I. There is a letter of notification and a participation survey that is just for Title I Part A. It can either go out on its own, or it can be included with that Declaration of Participation for the other federal grants. But you need to make sure that it gets sent out and it's included. So why are we required to send those equitable services out? Districts are required by statute to provide those services to students, parents, and teachers of participating students in private schools that are within and outside the district's boundaries. Now, I'm not the guru on that. David is the guru on equitable services, and I'm always curious to pick his brain about private schools that are outside a district's boundary and how you would, you know, that service plan, what that would look like. And then there's other programs are required to provide services to those private schools that are just within their boundaries only. And I think Title V is that way. Is it within their boundaries only, or no? I'm wrong on that. What am I thinking?
Brenda, I don't remember right offhand.
I'm trying to think what program would be to just within those boundaries. I know that Title
II.
Title II.
Title III. Yeah, it's basically any other program under ESSA requires equitable services to be provided to private schools within the district's boundaries only. Okay. Title I is different in that it requires you to provide services potentially across district lines. If a student were to attend, let's say, were to be a resident in Franklin County, in the Franklin County attendance area, but attends a private school in Fayette County, Franklin County in that case would be required to provide services in that Fayette County school. There are some caveats to that, but that in the general sense is the requirement.
Okay.
So it's different for Title I, where, you know, in Northern Kentucky, there are lots of private schools, lots of districts and independent districts up there. And they have lots of private school students that attend in private schools outside their district boundaries, they are technically required to provide services in each one of those private schools where their students, their home students, would attend. Now, they are doing some work up there to try to kind of minimize disruption and make services a little more efficient. And they're trying to do some things such as working together and developing agreements district to district, where one district would become the fiscal and programmatic manager for those services. And it gets kind of hairy there, but
I was going to say complicated.
Yeah, it gets kind of complicated, but that's the gist, that it does require you to actually follow kids with services across district lines there. So I will tell you, the ESSA requires there to be a non-public school ombudsman, and that is me. So when I'm answering private school questions, I'm kind of taking a middle of the road approach in trying to balance district responsibilities versus, services provided to private schools and those private schools' thoughts as well. And that's a tricky job because it requires me to remove, normally my job is to work totally in favor of districts, and in this job it's kind of, I have to do a balancing act to figure out what's going wrong. And my responsibilities with that job are essentially to help provide some professional or some technical assistance to districts and private schools. So I've created an ombudsman web page that has some frequently asked questions, some documents on there for your use, and for private schools use as well. And it provides links to different resources. In addition to that, I have to make sure that our applications are working correctly and calculating services correctly. We're working through some issues in migrant and some other programs that don't clearly define how services are to be provided to private school participants. There is a consultation packet that has to be sent to me when you consult and plan services for private schools, and we accomplish that through an upload in GMAP.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which you'll be getting information about in the near future. And I guess the last big piece that I have to take care of is I have to entertain any complaints, whether that's from a school district, member of the public, or private school, about those private school services. And again, anybody that has a complaint, first of all, should be working through the district to resolve that complaint first. But if it is not resolved in a satisfactory manner, anybody has the right to file a complaint with me, and then I have to perform an investigation, do some fact gathering, and make a determination about the end result of that complaint. So it's kind of involved, but I just wanted you to know that I am that person, and then there are some resources on the web for you to use when it comes to private schools, in addition to the program handbooks that exist as well.
Thank you, David. That's very good to know, because I know we're getting a multitude of equitable service questions right now with the CARES Act and just in general. And as at the district level, you have to realize that the services that you're providing to those private schools that have, that you have turned in their paperwork and you've consulted with them, you're required to proportionately fund that private school or homeschool off the top of your district allocation. So it comes off first. Make sure that you include an amount for their parent and family engagement that would include the families of the participating students. And I know that sometimes as we are using GMAP, I've had some questions about that page, the private school service page, and you have to go back to your school eligibility and put the number of students in that column so that it will generate in the private school page. So don't forget to do that, because sometimes it's not generating the information at the top of that page that you need. So just make sure you include that in the school eligibility page. Those services have to target the lowest achieving students, and those programs have to be designed and evaluated through ongoing consultation with the private schools. And that is the district's responsibility, is to design that, and evaluate what the private schools are asking for that funding, of whether it's professional development or if it's tutoring. The district oversees that, and both programmatically and fiscally by the district. That gives you some control over those services that are being provided to the private school. David, can you think of anything else that we would include here?
No, just that Title I is already a bear of a program, and this kind of adds to the burden of that program.
Yeah.
But yes, you're right, Brenda. Services, whether it is, whether it's offering services and consulting, to the expenditure of funds, to hiring staff to provide tutoring for students, each of those responsibilities, programmatically and fiscally, rests on the district's shoulders. The private school does have some responsibility, and that would be limited to really participating in the consultation and evaluation process. Mm-hmm. So a private school, they cannot receive money directly as a private school entity.
Right.
They cannot make final decisions on what the program will look like for their students, parents, and teachers. They cannot obligate funds for expenditure. All those things have to be either decided on or carried out at the district level. Let me see if there's anything else I want to get into. I think that's it for now, Brenda. I might think of something in a second.
Okay. I know that in the handbook there is a section on equitable services, and it's a great resource to go to if you have any questions. And then just on the web page, there's always, on the Title I web page, there's stuff that you can click on at the very bottom for equitable services, and then contact David anytime, because he is the guru, and he can guide you in the way you needed to be successful with this. It is hard to remember all the different pieces. It's like a huge machine, and there's so many gears in Title I. Oh my goodness. Which then leads to the monitoring processes. And we are getting kind of late, so I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. Kind of explain a little bit about the monitoring piece. So there are 10 to 15 desk monitors that will be conducted each year, and those occur in the fall. They began a new process for the 18-19 school year for those desk monitorings. And then in the spring, we will conduct 10 to 15 on-site visits. And that's in conjunction with the consolidated monitoring process, which includes all the other federal grants that would be, that are held within the consolidated application. Now, this spring, we were unable to fulfill some of those site visits. We're not quite sure what's going to happen. It may be that we do a lot more desk monitoring for the 2021 school year. It's hard to do site visits. The school's not in session. We understand that. So, and I guess districts will find out as time goes on what actually is going to happen with those that were tabled. If you were going to have a site visit, we'll probably be in touch with you sometime this summer to let you know what's going to probably happen with that. I'm assuming a desk monitoring. please remember that monitoring is just to help you get better and for us to provide technical assistance. It's just an opportunity for us to work with you at the district level to see if there's something that we can help you with, or if there's areas that you feel like, hey, you know, we've kind of struggled in this area, we need some help. We're there to provide technical assistance. It's not punitive whatsoever. There is on the Title I webpage, and this is a live link for monitoring checklists. Those are the checklists that we use when we evaluate district and schools. And they're really handy. It's nice to look at, to know, especially if you are contacted that you're going to have a desk monitoring review this year. It would be helpful for you to go ahead and look at that and see the type of evidence that you might need to provide for us. So districts will be notified a few weeks prior if you're going to be monitored. There are some uploads for documentation that we will need, some evidence that you will need to provide for us, and that will be included in an online folder, and there will be an assigned due date of when that's required to be submitted. KDE will review that documentation and they will follow up with some questions. We will go by those monitoring checklists. So you can, if you have that checklist, you can kind of know some of the questions we're going to be asking. Then we'll do a follow-up. For a desk review, there'll be a question and answer session via email, or it could happen by telephone with the district coordinator, or even a Teams meeting like we're doing today. If it's an on-site monitoring, there will be a question and answer with the coordinator, the finance officer, the homeless coordinator. If you have neglected facilities, they would be included. Principals of Title I served schools, those could happen face-to-face interviews. There could be a follow-up email or phone call after the visit occurs. So desk monitoring, essentially, we do not come into the district. We do it all from the Department of Ed in Frankfort, but on-site is where we actually come in with a small team and follow up with some of those interviews. Any questions so far, David, on the monitoring, or something you want to add?
I won't add anything. There's just a comment from Kelly that says, the checklist helped my county greatly this spring. I highly recommend using them as you prepare for monitoring.
Good, good. It's good to know that those are helpful. So the final step, and that's kind of where we are right now in our process at KDE, we're writing reports. And it is a lengthy process, let me tell you. As I came into the process midstream, I'm kind of seeing how it all works. KDE will give you some quality practices, some recommendations. So those quality practices are things that they're seeing that's occurring in your district with the program within Title I Part A. If it's, and also it could be some other quality practices in other federal grants. You know, you may get a quality practice in Title II or Title IV. Then there's some recommendations that come with that monitoring, where we kind of recommend some things that would help maybe with the program that would maybe make it more fluid, or some activities that we may think might be helpful. And then, of course, there's some findings that maybe assign some actions. So if we find some things that maybe just quite aren't as strong as they need to be, we might have some areas of improvement. So we would state that finding and what action would be required. And generally there's a due date with that. Sometimes it's just location of documentation or protocol, something that has been very informal that just needs to have some more substantial evidence with it. Generally, it doesn't take long for districts to correct some of those findings, and sometimes they realize that it's a finding and they're already in the process of correcting it. David, do you have anything you want to add to that, since I'm just kind of at the tail end of the monitoring process and really not the beginning of it?
Yeah, really, in consolidated monitoring, we come in with a group of programs, and what we'll do on site is we've worked together to identify districts based on a risk assessment that we use. That risk assessment includes anything from different financial matters to programmatic identifiers as well. We will come in as a group and monitor the district's programs. We'll all the different programs will do their own thing. They'll kind of go through the district, monitor and interview those things, and people that we need to talk to will come back. We'll write each of our programs will write an individual report and issue that report to the district. But at the end of the process, we also try to identify some cross-cutting themes, things that are great in the district and things that might need some work, and we issue what's called a consolidated report, and that report tries to tell you here's what the cross-cutting themes are. If it's an area of recommendation, we try to put in front of you some suggestions on how you can solve those issues in a cross-cutting manner at the district level, so working across different programs. In that particular program, where our initial programmatic reports might include findings, the consolidated report is a report of recommendations only and has no required follow-up, but it does allow you to see where you might be able to gain some efficiencies.
Thanks, David. That clarifies a lot. And I think right now we don't know what monitoring is going to look like for the spring of 2021, do we?
No, we have no idea at this point. I imagine in the next month or month and a half, we'll start kind of getting a better feel for what school's going to look like, and we'll make some plans based on what we see at that point.
Okay. So we're getting ready to wrap up. I'm sure there are still some questions that you may have about Title I, and you can put those in the chat box. I will share that your consultant for your district is there to help you. Please reach out to them. They can provide wonderful technical assistance. Don't be afraid to ask questions. That's what they're there for. They love it. Trust me, they love it when districts reach out to them because their job is dependent on that. It is to help you be successful, for you to be able to utilize your Title I Part A funding and to make it work for you. And a lot of times, I know I was under the impression I didn't want my consultant to know that I didn't know because I was supposed to know all these things. So I was reluctant, but now that I'm on the other end, I see that, hey, they were just there to help me. I don't need to know all the answers. And sometimes we may not know all the answers, but we definitely will find out. We'll get you the right answer. I know I do that very often with my mentor, who is doing a super job helping me navigate Title I waters. But please make sure that you do use your consultant. They're there for you. And if you don't know who your consultant is, the list for 2021 is on our Title I webpage, and it's just an easy click and it pops it up for you. If you have a new consultant this year, get in touch with them. Just make sure that you know who they are, because it's so helpful to work with them. And I do feel like we've got a great group of consultants, and right now we are almost fully staffed. That's going to be very helpful as we begin to start looking at applications and approve those applications, because our main goal is to get those applications back to you quickly with some feedback so that we have an approval so that you can start accessing those funds after July 1. But please remember that all sections of the consolidated application have to be complete before you can get superintendent approved, which then kicks the application in motion to all those different consultants of those federal grants. And, you know, all of those consultants have to be at an okay in order for the funding to be released. David, can you think of anything that I've left off or didn't include? This is my first being in command in charge of the training, so I'll make sure.
No, we'll stick around for a couple minutes if people have questions, but otherwise I just want to say, you know, like Brenda said, utilize us when you do have questions, and we thank each of you for joining us today. We wish this could have been more interactive and live face-to-face, but you know, it wasn't possible. So if you do have questions, you can feel free to put them in the chat box, and we'll address those with you. If we don't get any in a 2 or 3 minutes, we'll just end it there.
Okay. And then, you know, if you think of something afterwards, that I was notorious for that, just shoot us an email. You know, because we try to follow up as quickly as possible. Because I know being on that other end, you're waiting on an answer or some guidance before you could move forward. So we do, and I know our consultants are on top of that. We talk to them quite often. It's hard because we're all still working from home. I don't know what being in the office feels like because I have never been in the office since I've been hired. I've been in my basement since April 1st, but I do think that we are still trying to provide that technical assistance even remotely. And that means that our consultants are doing team chats daily so that, you know, when they get an application that something that they haven't seen before, they're reaching out to the other consultants for additional help, which is nice. That things like that happen in the office. They haven't really happened at home, but we're trying to continue that. So just make sure that you stay in touch with us and know that we're here to be an additional support for you guys. That's about all I have, David. I think it's about a wrap, don't you?
Yeah, let's give them a couple minutes maybe, and then if we don't have questions, we'll stop our recording, and that'll be it. Thank you all for joining us today, though. And
thank you, and I hope that the information was that we provided is helpful and makes your life a little bit easier.
Brenda, I think we can just wrap it up if you want to.
I will stop the recording. Let me see how I do that.